over the last couple of weeks, I made a bunch of updates to my studio. So I thought I would take you through everything I've been doing because it turned out to be maybe a little more work than I anticipated. Before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, thanks for coming by. You can do the like, subscribe thing, all that kind of stuff. But if you really want to help me out and you really want to support what I've been doing, there are a bunch of links down below. There's affiliate links. There's a link to an Atmos template that I sell. Please check that stuff out. That stuff helps me a bunch and helps me keep doing content. So I did some updates to my studio, and the thing that kind of started the whole thing was I finally got a new computer after a long time. And since my new computer is a lot quieter, I didn't need this big ISO rack in the studio anymore. And taking that out of the studio really kind of snowballed into me doing a lot of different things that I wanted to do. So let me just give you a little bit of background on this room. This is basically, it's the dining room in our house. I just converted it into my studio. When I left my staff engineering gig, I don't know, about 9 years ago now, initially I was traveling a bunch, but my studio work started to grow a lot more. And I thought, I need to have a place to do a bunch of work. And I'd already been kind of doing some stuff in this room, and it needed acoustic treatment. So I built a bunch of acoustic panels. And, I'm not fancy about making acoustic panels. The panels that are in here, they're wooden frames with rock wool inside. You can find a billion tutorials on YouTube on how to do this stuff. The panels on my walls, those were done with burlap, and some of the new stuff I did a little different, but getting ahead of myself. So when I initially treated the space, I kind of didn't treat the entire room. I really just treated the front half because I was only working in stereo at the time, and it was, basically where I sat. I wasn't really having clients in here. Everything I do has been mostly remote up until I started doing the Atmos stuff. I mean, everything was remote, and it sounded great up in front. So I didn't worry too much about it. But as I've gone into Atmos, I've been wanting to try some other things and wanting to utilize more of the space, and getting the new computer and then not needing the ISO rack. And that ISO rack, I mean, you could see in the video, it's big. It's about 40 inches deep, which takes up a big chunk of real estate in the room. Getting that out kind of freed me up to do some different things in here. And one of the things I'd been looking at is the latest version of the Dart. And if you're not familiar with the Dart, it's Dolby's kind of room configuration planning tool. I think it's the Dolby Atmos. What does Dart stand for? The Dart is the Dolby Atmos room design tool. And it just gives some good suggestions, and really the latest version, and I think the version before this, they've really been making some great improvements on this. And the layout suggestion that they suggested for this room was different than when I first was putting in Atmos, and I kind of wanted to try it. But one of the big things that would change for me to change the Atmos layout in here was I would move away from an equidistant layout to an orthogonal layout, and basically take my rear speakers all the way to the back of the room. I knew that if I was going to move those speakers all the way to the back, I would want to have some additional acoustic treatment in there, because I just didn't think it would be a good idea to have those extra speakers back there if there's no treatment back there. So I figured, okay, it's time to do some new acoustic treatment, because one of the other things that's been bugging me for years was my old ceiling cloud. That cloud was originally made up of two of the acoustic panels that I originally built, and one of those panels is warped. It drives me nuts. It's hanging on the wall now. And in fact, if you are good with woodworking and you have ideas on something that I could do to this panel to kind of fix it so it's not warped, please leave a comment below. I am not the greatest builder in the world, but I made these panels and the speaker stands in my room, and I'm okay now with building some stuff, a little more than I ever have been, that's for sure. But if you know how to unwarp that, please let me know, because otherwise it's probably only a matter of time before it drives me nuts to where I completely replace it. But at any rate, the cloud that I had in here, I just hated the way it looked, and didn't bother me that much until I started having clients come in to listen to Atmos, and I really just hated the way it looked. So I thought, hey, here's an opportunity. I am going to build new clouds for my studio. So the first part of this whole update was to build these new clouds, and I built two of them. The first one that's up there, it's close to the same size of the original two panels, but I actually built it a little bigger. So I got a fair amount more of absorption from doing that, because now I don't have the panel frames kind of running in the middle of the thing, and it looks a whole lot better. The cloud, again, I just built a frame, stretched fabric over it. This time I couldn't get burlap that was wide enough to cover it. So GIK Acoustics, they're here in Atlanta. I just went over to their office and got some fabric from them. And, I built the frames one day, and the next day got the fabric and stretched it over the panels and, built them, put them up in the air, and they're working great. So then I took the two panels that were originally the cloud, and I put those on my wall. So now I have a much more treated room, at least the whole room. And I got that second cloud. The second cloud is up in the back of the room. So, you can see in the video, there's more treatment in here. And I would say that it is right on the edge of where it would be too dead. Like right now, it feels good to me to be in here. I think if I put more absorption in here, I'm not sure how much I would like it at that point. That might get too dead. But the good news is, when I started remeasuring the room, it's a lot flatter without any EQ on my speakers and any calibration on there. One of the first things I noticed when I put the new panels in actually was it seemed to not be quite as bright in here anymore, and everything has sort of tightened up a little bit. So the next thing I did after getting all the treatment up was I moved my speakers. I put the rear speakers all the way in the back. This is the third time I think that I have moved those speakers, because I've slowly pushed them further and further back. They're not going to move now. Like, this is definitely their final resting place for this room. I went through and I recalibrated my entire system in here. Needed far less EQ than I've done before. The rears needed more because now they're in the corners and I've got boundary stuff that I'm dealing with, which I expected. But everything up front and on the sides, even the height speakers, much less EQ on them now in the actual calibration thing. And they probably sound better as a result of that. I had to bring the level up on the rear speakers because they're further away. But once everything got calibrated, sonically, the difference, it's not much. It's really subtle. I think it is a little bit better having those rear speakers where they are now, having them a little further away, but perceptually, when I'm sitting in the sweet spot, it's really not that different. I would actually guess that the difference has more to do with the change of angle on those rear speakers than it does the distance. In the previous setup, they were a little bit outside of Dolby's kind of sweet spot. I think their sweet spot, it's like 135 degrees from the front center, which the way it works out to, it's 45 degrees off center if you're looking backwards. So in the equidistant setup that I had, they were a little bit wider than that. So they were probably, I don't know, like 50 degrees off that point. And now they're probably more, I don't know, somewhere between 35 and 40 degrees. So they came in as a result. And the way you can kind of judge this is if you put your height speakers up so that you have an actual square so that they are 45 left and right and 45 up. The rear speakers, if you are at the Dolby optimal angle, they will drop right underneath or at least right in line with your rear height speakers. And I can just see now, like they're a little bit inside if I'm looking at them from my sweet spot. So not a major change, but definitely a little bit of a change. But, you know, sitting in my sweet spot and listening all day, it sounded great. I'm not really noticing big differences. I think the biggest thing that I'm getting used to is tonally, the room is a little bit different now from the new treatment and just kind of retuning my ears. But, you know, it's the same speakers calibrating the same way. It's not that different and it's sounding great. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. So if you got questions about the studio setup, things I did in here, you know, please leave a comment below. You know, you've got stuff that you did in your studio that's really cool. I'd love to hear about it because at some point I'll probably want to make some changes and update some stuff. So leave a comment below about that stuff. But thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.